Friendly neighborhood goth Dutchess here with what I'm hoping will be a fun series. I'm going to call it
Spoiled Rotten,
because I'm going to review some horror movies and I'm going to spoil them. So if you haven't seen said movie that I'm going to review, don't watch. I'm kind of doing this for the people who are interested in seeing said movies but were concerned or too scared, or maybe it was a problematic movie. They all are. All are. But I kind of wanted to give people, you know, a little space, a little look into some of the horrible horror movies that I enjoy watching without having to watch them themselves. So I'm here in my new, almost done office. I promise I will get rid of this terrible blanket and do little window curtains soon. But for my first episode, what I really wanted to do was follow, and I'm going to put it up, a little infographic of, I saw it was like the picture of the iceberg and then all of the iceberg that's underneath of it that you don't see. And it had the different like levels of horror movie going from least offensive in that offensive realm to then the more and more horrible, the more and more offensive, the more absolutely horrifyingly disgusting that a lot of people might categorize as torture porn. So, on this infographic, I have watched almost all of these films. There are some that I have not, which I will then of course watch to continue on this series. But for the first episode, we're obviously going to start, if you like, at the top of the least worst and least scary of these films. And my choices are Saw, 7, and Midsommar. So today I'm going to start with Midsommar because it is the one I have most recently rewatched and know a lot about and really enjoyed. To an extent, which we will discuss. So, to start with, maybe like a tiny kind of synopsis or explanation of this film. Midsommar is what I would describe as a cult horror film, and not like cult as in it gained a cult following because it was like a B horror film, which I also love, but cult in a sense of like religious or societal cult. So I can't think of it. I mean, I love watching documentaries on real world cults, so this one piqued my interest when I heard about it. I also heard from a lot of like previews and reviewers, oh my god, it's so horrifying, it's so terrible. I did not think it lived up to that hype. I don't often think that. So, the synopsis of this movie is centered around a girl who is, I would say, our main character, her boyfriend, who is kind of terrible, and their group of college friends who all go together on a trip. It has to do with what some of the boys in the group are doing for college, going to this area that they've been invited to, where there is a sort of cult situation, and the people like leave and come bring people back so they can kind of visit and learn a little bit about it. It all seems very polite, if a little tinged with that sort of religious trauma for me that comes up and goes, maybe this is not okay. We should leave. So they all go, they do some psychedelic drugs, which I really like that kind of thing in this film. The way that they show how the certain characters are experiencing those drugs, I think they did a very good job with it. Just like the CG way that they made the grass and the flowers and the trees and everything move. I've never been on those drugs, so it's kind of neat to see maybe what that might actually look like. I don't know if that's very realistic, but from what I've heard, it was pretty close. So like they drank a tea, some time passes, obviously main character gets a little bit upset about some things, but they have a meal with the entire like congregation or community in this little cordoned off area that seems very like, ooh, we love the plants, we love the flowers, oh, happy Midsommar. Like, it's a little eerie, but you can't quite pin your finger on the why, which is why this film was so interesting to me. So you get partway through and you're like, okay, it's still not... I have this complaint about a lot of horror films. It takes you too long to get to the meat and potatoes. I don't want an hour and a half of exposition to set up the half an hour of gore and horror and whatever. I want that to be happening faster and quicker and earlier on in the movie. So with Midsommar, they didn't really do that, which is okay. We did have a certain chunk of exposition, and then we had one really big thing that happened where they watched an older couple in like a ceremony jump off of a cliff and kill themselves, which of course upset almost everybody in the group except for the community. And the community's like, you know, they've reached a certain age, this is just how we do things, it's okay. Why didn't, you know, they're like, why didn't we all explain this to them so they knew exactly what they were seeing? Like, some of them are like, we should have explained that better. So it's like really upsetting. Nobody really decides to leave. Like, they try to in the heat of the moment, but they're convinced to stay. Some other small things happen here and there. Then people start to leave, but they aren't, you quickly get the sense they aren't actually leaving. The first body is found. You discover that they're not letting them leave, they are then killing them. And as they go on and start telling the story about like their own little community's religion, it gets deeper and deeper. Some of it is very unexplained, some of it you just have to kind of make up your own mind about. But the main character, they basically kind of pegged her to be their May Queen or Midsommar Queen, I'm not really sure. And through the course of the film, they kind of force her into certain situations to mold her into this queen. By the end of the movie, everyone is dead except for her and the community. And she basically gives the okay for them to kill her boyfriend in this final ceremony. It is not... Okay, the end is great. I really did like the ending. I liked the whole story. They did a pretty good job with pacing. But let's get into the meat and potatoes of why I liked this film, why I didn't like this film, and then why I think reviewers thought it was so upsetting and hyped it up more than I thought it deserved. So why I liked this film. I liked the sort of religious psychological horror that comes along with a cult that is trying to convince you it was your own idea to do such and such thing. I like that, you know, and then I like that sort of thing. I also liked the sort of, like, there was an aspect to almost like planned breeding, where one of the community girls tries to trick one of the guys into having sex because she's determined to have a child by one of the guys who isn't in the... It's like a religious reason that they don't fully explain. Almost like she's trying to make their next savior, perhaps? Like, I like those kinds of not fully explained, but you can kind of get the gist of it, culty psychological things. I really liked that aspect. I also, as I mentioned, really liked how they visually tried to portray being on specific psychedelic drugs. I thought that was very interesting. They did a beautiful job. The parts that aren't gore, because I know a lot of you don't like gore, but the parts that aren't gore are visually stunning. It's set in an idyllic landscape. Colors are vibrant and beautiful. The people's outfits are mostly white with lots of, you know, real flowers. It's absolutely beautiful. And then there's that underpinning that something is wrong and you can't put your finger on it. So I also really like the juxtaposition of this looks beautiful, innocent, and perfect, but something is very wrong. So that is why I liked it, in a sense. It tried to force you to think for yourself, and if you've watched many, many horror movies like I have, you could, at certain points in the movie, see where they were going with certain things, and I didn't dislike that I was right, but they didn't put a giant twist on those. They didn't really surprise me, which is okay. Why I didn't like the film? is partially to do with the hype. So I think we'll skip to the hype and then talk about why I didn't like the film. So the hype and the reviewers were saying this is like the scariest horror film, the scariest, most psychological horror film. It's going to terrify you. Oh my god, the gore, the deaths, the whatever. Like, the way they hyped this up, I expected to see far more on-screen gore deaths than actually happened. A lot of the deaths happen off screen and you only see like the Hannibal-esque tableau of their body afterwards, which is, I understand, still horror, and some people still are really upset by that. I don't find it as chilling if they die off camera. So the main couple that you see kill themselves is why I think the reviewers and the media hype this up as such a horrible movie, because you aren't given a lot of explanation, because a lot of them are in the community are speaking a different language and they don't tell the viewer what they're saying necessarily. So I can see where that concern for what's about to happen might build and build and build, and then when they jump off, you're completely stunned, just like the characters are, because they're trying to make you feel like you're there. I super understand that, I super get it, but I kind of saw it coming. There were some very easy, not cliched, but I feel like very easy to mark tells for what was about to happen, which is fine. I loved that part. It was perfectly timed and perfectly spaced out within the rest of the movie to be that most upsetting first thing that then drives your concern for the rest of the film. Thought they did great with that. But I think that is why the reviewers were so upset, because a lot of people were very startled and were very emotionally traumatized by this couple, you know, completely of their own accord, for the good of the community, throwing themselves off a cliff and dying. It's very foreign to Americans to have that sort of, not the sense of community necessarily, but that sort of giving when your only reason is old age. Like, it doesn't really add up to us. So I understand that. But the media hyped it up so much. I was expecting far more on-camera deaths. I believe the only other actual on-camera deaths are at the very, very end, when you know what's going on, and they telegraph that part of the ending very clearly, so you know what's happening. So it's not as horrifying, and I just don't see it being as horrible as the media and the reviewers said. Like, at the time it came out, here's what some of them said. I don't think I agree, but that's not to say I don't think it was a great film. But as I said, that is part of what I disliked about the film, was the reviewers and the media pushing so hard that it pushed my expectation into a chunk of horror that this movie was very clearly not. Because there are subsects of horror, which we don't really talk about a lot, and I think during this series I'm probably going to have to get more specific when I talk about that. This movie was not torture porn. This movie was not gore, slasher. It was closer to thriller, psychological thriller, but it was also a slow burn. It went very slowly, which I don't usually like films that go very slowly or take too long with exposition, because if you're writing and you're acting and your set dressing and everything isn't perfect, the viewer starts to get bored. Even though it's horror and we know something bad's eventually going to happen, we're like, but when? Like, there's no tension concerning when that thing might happen if you get bored and complacent and, you know, broke the immersion of the film in a sense. So what I didn't like was due partly to the hype of the media, because I expected a lot more on-screen deaths, a lot more on-screen gore, and what I got was psychological thriller, minor gore, and then more, I wouldn't even call some of it gore. it does remind me very much of NBC's Hannibal and some of his murder tableaus. Like, some of them were fairly bloodless, but it was, you know, bodies with their skin pulled off and posed in a certain way to maybe look angelic, and then lots of flowers. So, like, it's kind of horrifying to know that that was skin, but when they do an up-close zoom-in of this dead person's face, and his face looks completely normal except for he has sunflowers in his eyes, like, I'm not scared by that. That wasn't... I mean, yeah, he's dead, but is that the only thing that was creepy? Because I don't see the sunflowers, unless there's some underlying reason to use sunflowers that I am unaware of. I don't get why some of that was so creepy. And like I said, the tension and how they ran the rest of the film didn't make it creepier or explain why it should be creepier. So I'm not sure. I was left at the end wondering why this film had been heralded as this absolute horror masterpiece, and it's gonna scare you and you're gonna have nightmares and you're never gonna want to go anywhere ever again that's outdoors. Like, I didn't understand that part of the hype, which made me upset with the film, which is unfair to the film, because it is a great movie, but it is not horror in the sense of what I expected. It is not going to have a ton of gore because it was trying to be more artsy and kind of delicate and suggestive with that, as far as some of these other films that we all know and love, like classic horror films, have a ton of gore, and it's like you see someone get chainsawed right in front of your face. And that's kind of where I wasn't expecting a chainsaw, but I was fully expecting some sort of stabbing or skinning or something to occur. And it was all just very drawn out and off-screen, and most of the on-screen creepy stuff that happened was like that weird sexualized like mating practice that this religious cult had. So it was like this girl putting like pubic hair in this food that she fed one of the guys, and I'm like, yeah, that's creepy and gross, but like, it's not horror. It's not horror. I'm sorry, guys. Like, I wasn't all that scared. One of the other reasons I didn't like it is also no fault of the film, which is I have a hard time finding horror, or psychological horror specifically, scary if I can't see myself in that situation. That's why they give you certain characters, because they're hoping one of them is someone that you'll empathize with enough that you can see yourself in that situation. I didn't see myself in really any of the characters. I'm not saying it was because they weren't goth. It's not it. But like, I couldn't see myself just randomly going on a trip because we met somebody in a hostel in Sweden. Like, I've watched the Hostel movies. You don't do that. So like, I don't see myself ever agreeing to go off to an area with no cell reception, no internet, just because my shitty boyfriend wants to go work on his thesis on religious culture in the whatever. Like, no, I don't see that happening. So I couldn't see myself in the film, and I couldn't empathize to that degree with those characters, which then again made the film less dramatic and less impactful at the end. That being said, I really like this film. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It is a beautiful film if you're not, squeaked out by watching, dead bodies in poses. If you have religious trauma, this might be a little more difficult to watch as well, because there is a lot of occulty vibes and it's a little creeps. That being said, it is more community driven than like one leader saying all of it, so for me it was a little easier to watch because there wasn't one leader telling everybody and molesting everybody or doing all that nasty stuff. It was just a very community, we're all doing this so that we get a good harvest or whatever. As far as other like trigger warnings for this film, if you wanted to watch it, there's the drug use. There's some possibly dubious consent regarding the drug use. There's some dubious consent with regards to that girl putting fluids and hair and whatever in food and feeding it to someone. Dubious consent in regards to drugs and sex, murder and dismemberment and death, but on I would say a lesser degree than something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or, any of the Freddy or Jason or classic films that we know and love. It was very beautiful and delicately done, which is not what the hype led me to believe. That being said, I would probably give Midsommar like an 8 out of 10. It was really, really well done. I recommend it. I don't recommend it super highly, but I've watched it more than once, which means I did like it. I couldn't discern any really remarkable plot holes, which is good, because that means the writers did their job. I don't like it when there are plot holes that I can easily zoom in on. So they did a good job with that. The music was fairly unremarkable for the most part, but I think it had to be that way to get across the whole, community kind of lost in time, old-fashioned-y. They only really had the music that was there, and that makes sense. As far as set dressing, it was absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, well done, fantastic and impactful and visual. But like the main things that I remember from the movie aren't the gore or the deaths. It's like the outfits that the girls put the main Midsommar queen in towards the end. She had like a full cape of fresh flowers. It's absolutely gorgeous. So, I mean, in summary, it's a good film, but I do feel like one that suffered due to unclear reviews and a kind of inconsistent hype, because people probably like me watched it expecting something that it wasn't, and then felt kind of like, ugh, well, no, wasn't what I expected or wanted, which I don't think is really the film's fault. So, that being said, let me know if you have seen Midsommar, and let me know which of the other 2 films in the first level of the iceberg you think I should do as episode 2. Your choices are Saw and 7. Going to have to revisit either of these before I do it, because it has been such a very, very, very long time since I watched them. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you will enjoy the next couple of episodes. And I hope I have the strength to continue doing it till the very end of that iceberg. It's gonna be a problem. We're gonna get in it. We're gonna get deep in there. Let me know what film you're most excited about. Bye!